Good evening and welcome to a special episode of Takedown Live with Chris Hansen. Tonight we're going to do something a little different, but I'm very excited to have our guests. We have Sheriff Chris Swanson of Genesee County, Michigan. As you know, and as you've seen on my Takedown investigations, the sheriff operates a department that has the ghost team, and you go after, among other things, child predators. We also have Mike Manley, who has been a defense lawyer for 30 years in mid-Michigan and represents some of the men who get caught up in that net. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. We're going to get to you guys in a minute. I've got a million questions. I know our viewers have a million questions, but first, I want to go to Sean Reck, who's in the next studio. Sean is the co-founder of True Blue, as you know, and he's got some information he wants to share, and he's going to be fielding the questions from our viewers tonight. Sean?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. We want you to know that the store is up, trueblueswag.com, so you can buy a shirt like this one. I'm not just the president of True Blue. I go to sporting events and serve as the True Blue blimp to attract attention for the network. But you can get a shirt that looks like you're directing traffic or something a little more tasteful, but they're available. We're going to give everybody watching $5 off their first order. Just use the code. Put up the code, guys. I forgot it. There we go. TBSUB623. And that's going to give you $5 off your order. So if you go to True Blue Swag, you'll be able to order shirts. They're all in stock now. We also have stickers. They're in the store and they're free. You just have to pay shipping. We'll give you like 10 stickers if you plan to put them on your 10 cars. So just letting you know that that's up and running. Please send your questions. This is truly a live show. We'll ask questions minutes after we get them. So please send those along. And we want to also let you know that stings are coming back next Thursday. We had to wait for some charges to be filed against some people, so we couldn't air the episodes. That's why I've been holding them, and we got them in the pipeline now. So we've got quite an inventory, and we're going to start giving you a new sting every Thursday night, starting next week. Thanks for joining us, and back to Chris.
Thank you, Sean. Sheriff, I want to start with you. The ghost team. How did this begin?
It first began internationally. I, in 2016, linked up with an organization that takes people from America that have undercover operator experience, whether it's dope, Delta Force, SEAL team members, and we go to foreign countries that do not have the American-style policing. Their policing many times are corrupt, and they are part of the perpetrators in the predator world. We play roles, and you sit in environments where we become customers, and we order up children working with the traffickers. And then when the kids are brought to a corporate party, whether it's in Mexico or in Thailand or in Haiti, we rescue the kids, we all get taken into custody, the traffickers get processed by the federal police. It was on a trip that I came back from Haiti in 2017, and I played a role as a corporate CEO that was having a party, and it was at the same time 6 real females were taken from Europe over to the Dominican, thinking they were going to be at a 5-star hotel. They were actually kidnapped. Their passports were taken to Haiti, and our mission was to get intel. And we went into this club, and we're there, and it's loud, and the predators and traffickers are all in there, and we're talking to these females, getting intel. And it was from the second day of that operation. I cut a video. I still have the video, actually, where I said, I need to know that if it's happening in Haiti, it's happening in Flint. And it was that trip back that I got with my former boss, our dear friend and my predecessor, Sheriff Packel, and I said, we need to start a human trafficking proactive team. And that's what started Ghost in May of 2018.
Now, we at True Blue have been embedding with your department, as well as other departments around the country, but give our viewers a sense of the impact the Ghost team has had over the years it's been in operation.
Well, certainly working with you gives us a platform to get the message out for not only predators that are watching, knowing that they could knock on a door and see either you or me, neither one of us you want to see. The second thing is it gives people a voice that have been perhaps trafficked or sexually assaulted in the past. And so when we embed with somebody like yourself in this platform, we are able to expand the brand of Ghost. And Ghost, Genesee Human Oppression Strike Team, has been labeled now as one that not only enforces, but also gives hope to victims. And that has allowed us to work in 51 counties out of 83 in Michigan, 7 states around the nation. We work with teams and in safe houses and aftercare facilities, and it has really become the brand of human trafficking enforcement. And I'm proud to say that the National Sheriff Association, that represents 3,084 sheriffs in America, they're launching it nationwide as the platform for human trafficking in America.
You've caught doctors. You've caught police officers, executives at major corporations, people who have traveled hours to meet a child for sex. It's stunning, really. Give me a sense of the number of predators who've been caught in the Ghost net.
So our first operation was a rescue in May of 2018. Since then, we've done both rescues and proactive operations. And we've arrested 186 predators. And our national stats, which show that one predator off the street will save the lives of 25 future victims. So we're well over 4,000 victims impacted in a positive way by arresting 186 predators.
Mike Manley, you've been a criminal defense lawyer for some 30 years. And because of where your practice is, you end up representing some of the predators the sheriff has caught with his team.
Yeah, I've probably represented a little over 10% of the 180-some that Ghost has arrested. But I want to, first of all, just tell you how honored I am to be here and commend your network, True Blue, for bringing a different perspective, because I think your viewers are going to hear a different perspective, maybe get into the mind of the offender. And what I like to say, it's the same crime, but we have a different criminal. And we put that net out there, or the sheriff puts that net out there, and he brings in a lot of different fish. Some are predators. Some are ones that need to be taken out of the ocean, so to speak, and never to be put back. And there's a place for them.
Here's what's fascinating to me about your experience in all this. The sheriff and his deputies talk to these people in terms of an interrogation. I talk to them as a journalist, editorially. I get one story, the detectives get one story, but when these cases come to you, it's Mike Manley and the accused in an office, one-on-one. What did you do? And you've got to get inside this person's mind and decide, how do I best represent them? And honestly, what best represents justice? So perhaps it's you who knows best the mind of set of some of these guys.
I think you're exactly right. First of all, you have the attorney-client privilege. Somebody's not going to open up to you. They're not going to open up to the sheriff. They're going to minimize. They're going to deny. Their world has just caved in, crumbled when they walk in to see either one of you, and they know they're on TV, and they're going to try to put the best foot forward, and they're in shock. By the time they get to me, I think they've had time to reflect. I don't condone any of this type of behavior. We're actually probably harder on our clients than anybody could be to make sure that, number one, there's accountability, and number two, that what do we have out of that net? Is it a true predator, or is it somebody that has certain mental health issues or addictions that we can get them to the right treatment so they don't do this again?
Here's a question I want to pose to both of you, because I've talked to therapists, psychiatrists who work in this business, for instance, for the U.S. Marshal's Office, who go into penitentiaries and they interview stone cold predators, pedophiles, who have nothing to lose. And what they will tell you almost routinely is that there is a link between child pornography, the viewing of child pornography, and offending. Sheriff, let's start with you.
It's like addictions, and Mike is so right. There are people that are true predators, that they seek a prey, and their mission is to destroy and fulfill a very deviant, violent sexual gratification. There's other people that go down a rabbit hole, and they have no idea how they got so bad. These are mainly men, mainly white men from America and in Europe. They're the #1 consumers of child pornography in the world, and the #1 consumers of human trafficking victims. But when you go back all the way up, it starts small. And this dopamine release, it doesn't get fulfilled, so they go deeper and deeper and deeper, and then they become more addicted to the violence, and they're not really acting out against people yet, and then that doesn't do it. And you see this progression happen over time. What we cast as that net Mike talked about, he gets into the minds of these people that really do historically tell you where it started, when it started, and the timelines are fascinating. 9 times out of 10, the people we catch have never had any interaction with law enforcement.
Does that mean they haven't done it before?
No, just haven't been caught.
Because over and over, and you know this, Sheriff, and I'm sure you do too, Mike, I hear, this is my first time. I've never done it before. Last night, we were on a predator sting, and I heard that exact story. I've never done it before, in a case where the guy blamed Satan for luring him into this situation.
That's the minimization. Obviously, they're in shock, and a lot of people lie. They're on TV, they know their wife may be watching, their colleagues, or members of the community, the clubs that they belong to, and their life is shattered. So some people, it is their first time. A lot of them, it's not. May not be the first time that they went for a 15-year-old, and I can touch on what I've learned, and I'm not an expert in the area, but what I've learned from experts on how that slippery slope continues and how they ultimately get there.
Talk about the link between child porn, even mainstream porn, if there is such a thing, on places like Pornhub, and the guys we see walking into these sting operations.
Chris, that's a great question, and you're spot on. In my experience, the cases that I have done, which are numerous, working with the sheriff and other sheriffs within Michigan, is a direct link between pornography and ultimately ending up in a sting. And it starts small, and it goes into an addiction or a disorder, and then you catch them.
Take me through this, and I know there's no one-size-fits-all explanation for these guys, but if there is a trend you see, how does this work? What does the guy tell you in terms of how it gets started and how this goes from an online fascination or maybe an addiction to offending?
Right.
Getting in a car, driving an hour or more to meet a child for sex.
Please excuse because I'm not an expert, so I'm speaking as a lawyer that has talked to experts, so I don't want any viewers mad at me.
But you talk to these men.
Right.
One-on-one in a dome of confidentiality.
Right.
With attorney-client privilege. They're more likely to tell you the truth than they are to tell the sheriff or me the truth.
It's almost similar. Pornography becomes an obsession. As the sheriff talked about, they start with mild pornography, something that they may be interested in. Then it moves on to fetishes. It moves on. They may watch gay porn and be repulsed because they're not gay. But again, that brain and the dopamine that's working in the brain. Then they get into the violent type. They may watch bestiality. They may watch things that are horrifying to them. And some of the experts have called it morbid curiosity, and they analogize it to watching the alligator eat a human being or Saddam Hussein's execution, that you are repulsed by watching, but they watch. It becomes an obsession. And once the obsession of pornography, then the ultimate one is child pornography. And that's you can watch all the other ones, that's illegal. And that's where they get in trouble with the obsession as it relates to child pornography.
And Sheriff, you've said this before, and I echo this, that each time an image of child pornography is viewed, it's the re-victimization of the child in that image.
And not only do people try to minimize it, they try to rationalize it. Oh, this is not in America. This child is not in America, so they don't see it as a true victimization. But if that child is in Chile, that child is still being abused by a trafficker or somebody who is manufacturing and distributing child pornography. And that whole network, they're just as guilty as knocking on the door if you view child pornography.
I want to pick this up, Mike, with you in a minute, but first I want to go to Sean Reck in the next studio. Sean, we've already got some people asking questions from our audience tonight. Share that.
Yeah, we do. Let me answer one question first. A lot of people write this underneath our videos on YouTube. Why do we get up to 700,000 views on new videos, but we only have 40,000 subscribers? And that's because we don't ask people to like and subscribe like everybody does. We need to start doing that. So we would really appreciate if you liked what you're watching right now and subscribed. That would help us a great deal in getting the word out. A few questions here. First of all, Rough Rider, your questions will be answered, and I'll ask your question first. And yes, you're going to get a shirt. He says, a question for Sheriff Swanson. Have you ever worked in conjunction with Interpol?
So the organization I was with that does international experience, yes, they work with Interpol. That has a global outreach, but the national police of any country is who we usually work with. So in Haiti, they have a national Haitian police that reports directly to the president. So Interpol, they're a great resource, but unless you're doing something international. We also get referrals from Interpol to Homeland Security and even Secret Service that do child pornography stings, that if they have somebody in Australia that is viewing child pornography manufactured in America, they'll give that tip to us. They'll filter that down. They'll call the locals, and then we'll work that local end.
Have you had many cases out of Genesee where there have been links internationally? I know you recently had a child pornography case where adults were arrested, and we talked about this the other day for a story that's going to go on True Blue under our True Crime Nation news magazine. 4 adults were arrested for manufacturing and distributing child pornography. They were using children who were foster care children under the care of people they knew. They would volunteer to watch them, care for them, and then drug them with gummies, THC gummies, and force them to be in these pornographic pictures.
Right, they were true manufacturers. They were content creators. They were absolutely disgusting and horrible individuals, and they used these 5 to 10-year-olds and a 14-year-old to produce this type of content. Ejaculating in a bag of M&Ms, waiting for it to dry and feeding it to the children. Like, who does that? That video that they monetize is global. There are no borders when it comes to child pornography in America, around the world. Wherever it's produced, it's seen around the world.
Mike, you gave me an example the other day in our conversation in the ramp up to this live show about a guy watching or looking at porn, and suddenly there's a pop-up for one of the social media platforms inviting him to engage in a chat with somebody else. I was fascinated by that because I really didn't understand or was aware of how this would work. Explain this to me.
Well, it's very interesting because it's almost universal when they come in on a ghost type of case where they're watching a Pornhub type of movie, a video, and all of a sudden there's 4 pop-ups and it says, do you want to, and I'll just say the F word, 4.1 miles away. And there's a picture
Wait
of
a minute, so there's a location,
yes.
Geotag.
a geotag
Yes.
with a person's picture.
Right.
Claiming that they want to have sex.
Want to have sex, and you can have that within 4.1 miles away, and you just click right there. And we talked about the obsession in the first part. So we're obsessed with pornography, and then you see that. The second component that I've learned is the loss of control. So you click on that, and a lot of times it directs you right to where Ghost is. And it's usually somebody, it's always somebody over the age of consent, because somebody under the age of consent on that first ad is not going to be able to post that ad. So almost universally, again, they click onto that looking to have that conversation about possibly having sex, because even though you may be married, even though you're in a great relationship, you've now become obsessed and you've lost control. And that's where they click on to that. And a lot of times it may lead to a real person. A lot of times it may lead to Sheriff Swanson. A lot of times it may lead to Chris Hansen.
So, because theoretically, and by the regulations of these social media platforms, you have to be 18 or 19 years old to be on them. Anybody who is younger would have to lie to get on them.
Correct.
But that happens, and we all know it does. So this person gets on, they see 19, they have the chat, and it turns out the person on the other end is actually saying they're 14 or 15.
Right.
That's illegal.
It's illegal.
But at this point, why can't they just say, no, you're too young, I'm not going to travel to have sex with a 14 or 15-year-old girl?
Well, Sheriff Swanson will tell you most of the people do say no.
That's right.
And the majority of the people say no that clicked on that, were maybe curious, checked it out, and had the conversation, fantasized about the conversation, loved to have those sex type of talk, sexting, those types of things. And but when you get the person that's obsessed, that has now lost control of his behavior, and they continue to talk. And that's the biggest thing that clients come in and say, I was entrapped because they said they were 19 and they changed to 15. And that's kind of the layperson's belief that the police lied to me. They said they weren't Ghost. They said it wasn't Chris Hansen. They said they were truly a person. And the law allows for police to do that as an investigative technique.
Is this ever entrapment?
Very, very rarely, in my opinion, is it entrapment, because you can present somebody with a crime. If you're laying there with a $20 bill in your pocket and pretending like you're a homeless person and somebody grabs that $20 bill from you, that's not entrapment. It was just they presented you with an opportunity to commit a crime. So entrapment, at least in Michigan and in the federal courts, is reprehensible police conduct that took somebody that had no intention of ever committing a crime and almost forcing them to commit a crime. It's one of the toughest standards ever to be met, and in Michigan, it's a question of law, which means the judge decides. In federal court, it's a question of fact, the juries decide that. So you may have a little better chance with a jury, but very, very rarely when you present an opportunity for a crime does it ever reach the level of entrapment.
Let's go to Sean in the next studio for another question from the folks watching tonight. Sean?
This is a question for Sheriff Michael Manley. Do you feel some of your clients can ever be rehabilitated?
It should say defense lawyer, Michael Manley.
I got a
Chris Swanson. You got
a promotion.
There.
Yes, I may not get the death threats this week. I'm down to 2 a week, but yeah, I believe everyone that I have had can be rehabilitated, and I really do believe that. And the number one question, Chris, that I get asked is, how can you defend those people?
Well, that's where I was going next,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of the people watching tonight want to know that. Do you ever have a moral dilemma or a quandary representing people who are caught trying to have sex with children?
Absolutely. I have a moral dilemma if I were to turn my back on them and not try to help them, try to help society, hold them accountable, yet getting them help and getting them defined as where they fit in with, are they the true predator, or is it somebody that is fighting that addiction, disorder, or obsession where they just can't stop? And that's what I believe is the majority of the people caught in that vast net, where they can be corrected and get out of that cycle of shame.
I want to pursue that with you in a second, but I want to go to the sheriff first because I think you might have a different take on the rehabilitation part of this. And I know, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but a lot of the sheriffs around the country with whom we work are lock them up.
Mm-hmm. The reality is everybody watching and everybody here in this studio battles with something. And you can battle, but also have accountability. That's why sex crimes are the only crime that after you pay your debt to society, many times the court requires you to be on a registry. 25 years to life. There's no other crime like that. Because I think rehabilitation is subjected to different people. I think people that struggle with pedophilia or sex addictions will always struggle with that. That's why there's accountability. That's why there's certain things that they can and cannot do. I agree with Mike, and we have talked before over many, many cases. You have literally one of the best attorneys in all of the Midwest, because not only is he a legal expert, but he's got a heart. We talk about sometimes that we are missionaries in this field. I don't always draw my gun at every police call. I don't ever grab and fight people. The way we do our job is different per person. Do I think people can be completely wiped clean of it? I don't think an addict is ever not an addict, but they recognize after 20, 30 years of not being addicted that they have a sense of control, but they also have boundaries and accountability. That's what I think what we do in our cases is what's going to keep this person from reoffending? How do we get that back in life? How do we protect the victim? And everybody walk away where we don't repeat crimes.
We've seen cases in other jurisdictions, one recently in Ohio, for instance, where a guy got caught in the sting. He already had a criminal record, violent criminal record. Gets caught in our sting. 2 weeks later, he's caught in another county in a hotel room with a 14-year-old girl having sex and videotaping it to sell that video. Is that a guy who can be rehabilitated?
Yeah, see, I think it's subjective. And that's why when we first talked, there's a net that catches people. You ask anybody that's been in prison, they'll tell you half the people in prison should never come out. These are people that are in prison telling you that. But the other half of people, they've done what they've done, they've recognized it, and there's got to be a path for them to rehabilitate into the world that we live in. But I think if you come at everything, like you said, every sheriff, put them away, lock them away, that's just not real. It sounds great as a soundbite to be a tough lawman. I'm a tough lawman, but I also understand that you rule with a steel fist and a velvet hand. And there's times to know the difference between the two and use good discretion, ultimately protecting people. That's what I swear to.
Are there cases where somebody should be locked up for 20, 30, 40 years or life? They're just not able to be rehabilitated.
Absolutely.
And you've seen those.
I have them, absolutely. I've talked to them, I've seen them, and these aren't murderers. These are people that literally are sex deviants. They are sexual predators. They will look at people just like an addict looks at fentanyl or other addictive materials, and that's all they think about. The power of addiction is like holding your breath for 2 minutes and somebody telling you not to breathe. What are you going to do to fight for the next breath? Whatever you need. There are people that they can't turn that switch off. There's no boundaries that'll keep them there. There's no nothing. They have to be separated from society, but that's not all of them.
Have you had clients, Mike, where you've said, this guy shouldn't be out, or that you've been anxious about the fact that this person will ultimately get out, and while you've done your job as a defense lawyer, and everybody deserves a vigorous defense, that I may see this guy again?
How I've personally felt?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. There are dangerous people out there. One of the reasons I'm on this show is to try to help people to not get into that pornography addiction, to control it, to be aware that it can be that slippery slope. And so anytime I can come out here and say, you know, it's not going to end well, and put that message out there. Most of the people that come to me are all pro-law enforcement. They can't believe that the police would think they are like this, yet they're caught knocking on that room, and Sheriff Swanson is on the other side. And every single time I say, you are so lucky that it was Sheriff Swanson or Chris Hansen on the other side of that door. Do you know how many murders take place when you knock on a door like that and somebody on the other side robs you and puts a bullet in the back of your head? Be thankful that the Sheriff's Department treated you with dignity and respect and let the legal process claim. I've seen how both of you have handled yourself with the alleged perpetrators at the time.
Well, not everybody would agree with you. Well, some of the perpetrators being among them. But you have likened this to a heroin addiction.
Absolutely. And it's that second part, when I say it becomes uncontrollable, the slippery slope of the pornography addiction, the obsession, and then you can't stop. And the analogy that we spoke about earlier was a heroin addict. And somebody comes to them and says, I have heroin for you, and they're going through withdrawals. Their brain is just functioning in a way that they have to get that next fix. There is nothing else on their mind. They're willing to give up their family. They're willing to give up all their money. They're willing to give up their career, their reputation. And right before they start to think, that heroin may be laced with fentanyl. And when I shoot that into my veins, I may die. Very real possibility with the way we have heroin deaths and things to that effect. And they still do it. They still take that risk. They still take that chance. And without Narcan and the sheriff making it free for everybody in our neighborhood, in our community, which I carry in my vehicle to make sure that somebody laying on the street may not be overdosed, they take that risk. And it's the same thing with these ghost cases. They ask, is this Ghost? Mm-hmm. Is this Chris Hansen?
We see it in the chats.
It is. It's right there.
And not just in Genesee County. We see it in Polk County, Florida, Montgomery County, Ohio, all over the country. In every jurisdiction, we will see either, is this a sheriff? Sounds like a Chris Hansen sting.
Right.
And yet they come anyway, Sheriff.
So I got to answer this question by an example that we just had. We arrested a guy who drove past the Ghost marked vehicle because our rookie patrol officer didn't park in an area that he should have. He's too close. Drove past the marked patrol car that said Ghost and still showed up.
The big Suburban you have that says Ghost all over
the Tahoe
that
you use has
to go to schools for education.
Absolutely. It literally is a marked patrol car that says Ghost. When Mike talks about that drive, we, in many of our chats, and I'm not afraid to say it, we give them duties to do. Go to the store, buy a bottle of this, non-alcohol, to try to break that and see if they're really full of intent. Maybe getting out of the car, going to a gas station to get a bottle of pop for a 14-year-old that you want to have sex with after you just dropped off your 14-year-old to the babysitters is going to shake and rattle your soul to think, what am I doing? And they come yet again. And those are the kind of individuals, when we talk about that dopamine dump through the hypothalamus, there has to be, and many times it's men, there has to be a physical release. And it's like buck fever, except for this one is deviant.
You know, we see this, Mike, in the transcripts where the decoys posing as the child will give the potential predator an out. You know, there are a number of junctures where you could turn left and avoid being on one of my takedown shows or being prosecuted by the Genesee County Sheriff's Office and the prosecutor in Genesee County and being defended by you. They are given an out here.
Well, the best analogy I can give on that type of situation is when that dopamine dump in their brain and they're addicted, the accelerator is to the floor, the pedal is to the metal, and there is no brake. And they are going to go straight ahead, and they'll pass the Ghost car. They may know that Chris Hansen is most likely on the other side of that door, and they're willing to take that risk. And if you look at any type of addictions, the risky behavior, whether it's alcohol or drugs or pornography, you have the obsession, the loss of control, the risky behavior, then basically you have terrible things that happen in your life. And it's very consistent. But I had a professional tell me in very basic terms, The accelerator is to the floor, and there is no brake. And that's what's going on in their mind.
I had one of my own officers who was on duty in the jail chatting us on an operation, and he's one floor above us. This guy has seen all my briefings. He knows that we are the founders of Ghost, and yet he chats to the point where he says, after work, he gets out of 6P, I want to come have sex with you.
This is a deputy in your jail. Former
yes,
deputy.
yeah, last year in 2022. And I got the intel. I was at a different location, and they said they popped up his picture, and they said, this is one of your deps, Sheriff. One of my own team members. Sheriff, this is one of your deps.
Did you talk to him after he was arrested, personally, or no?
I did not, and I'm going to tell you why. He did.
Tell me about that case. I mean, how does he explain this to you?
One of the great things about that is that he never showed up. And there's a couple of them that we've had. I think the sheriff and I have had 3 cases where the conversation in the chat happens, but they don't show up. Unfortunately, in Michigan, the crime is already committed.
In most states.
In most states. So the crime is already committed with the enticement or the procurement or the agreement.
The solicitation.
The solicitation to have. So the chat, the crime is committed. I'm happy when they don't show up. It helps me go to the sheriff and say, you know, we have these problems with these fantasies, and people get into chat rooms and they talk garbage, garbage in, garbage out, so to speak. We had one example where sheriff had somebody, one of my clients, chatting terrible things, showed up and dropped off Chipotle at the bottom of the Red Roof End stairs and left. Well, got halfway home and they were pulled over by the sheriff's deputies because the crime was already committed. A crime was already committed. Not all of them as if you were to show up. And again, that's a mitigating factor when we look at how we resolve these cases. Another one circled the parking lot, and about the 12th time he circled, they were met by the sheriff and brought in. But again, it allows me to differentiate between that predator that you're talking about with the U.S. Marshals versus somebody that break finally got there right at the stairs. I left the food for you, text message, there is food for you. I hope things are going well, and they leave. And that's what we're hoping for. And we're hoping that this is going to warn people out there that that slippery slope of addiction and the pornography is real.
Sean Reck has a few more questions from the folks listening and watching tonight. Sean?
Yeah, we got a couple questions for Sheriff Swanson. The first one is, how do you feel about amateur predator hunters?
Great question. I don't know who asked that question, but they deserve 2 T-shirts. Chris Hansen is different. He has, and I've said this before, he has done what he's done before it was cool. And that is, you've always worked with law enforcement, even though you're not law enforcement. That's the difference. I respect people's heart, just like I have, and Mike and everybody here, to protect kids. But when you do it as a vigilante without law enforcement, we can't use that. We can't use it as part of our investigation. And we just had a case.
And I was going to ask you about this in the course of the show, so I'm glad Sean brought this up. But I get asked all the time, you know, why don't you partner with so-and-so and so-and-so? And I give them the same answer. Look, I support, you know, citizen journalists. And I support people's privilege and right to the First Amendment and go on social media platforms. And these people, in some cases on podcasts, have helped crowdsource crime solutions, and they've exposed some bad people. The problem, of course, with some of these guys is that they can be committing crimes themselves. Tell me about the case you just had within the last week in your jurisdiction.
I mean, just to your point, I mean, if somebody sends you an underage picture of a child, even if you're a vigilante, you are in possession of child pornography. So there's a risk for that. I would much rather those that have the heart to do right work with us to say, listen, I just happen to stumble across somebody who wants to have sex with a 14-year-old. Let us embed with you, and let's take that chat, and we'll work it to get the full prosecution. But this most recent case, one of our locals started chatting up somebody that convinced him to come for a 14-year-old. And when the individual came from out of state to this location, they got into a physical altercation because there's no law enforcement.
So the vigilante and the alleged predator,
Correct,
who was lured here by the vigilante, got into an altercation.
Right, and the suspect coming was trying to get out, and so the vigilante took it upon himself and broke out the windows and slashed the tires.
Slashed the tires.
Right, and that got into a big mess, and he ended up going to jail.
So the vigilante went to jail.
Yes.
And was arrested.
And didn't have to. I mean, I wish that this individual would have come forth and said, you won't believe this, but I got somebody coming from out of state. It had given us plenty of time to spin up, and it was plenty of time for us to take over and be there and set up. But again, I love people's intent to do right, but there's a right way to do it.
And what happened to the alleged predator? Was he arrested?
I mean, we're still working that, but we were not involved in any of that. So I can't.
So it's a mess in terms
yes,
of
it's a mess. It's a mess legally. There's rules of evidence that don't apply. There's the chats that don't apply. When we do an operation, we use, and I hope they're a sponsor one day, we use Callio, and it's able for us to dump all these chats. And we get them, and they are uploaded to our report. It's done right. It's done professional, like the studio. It's done right and professional. People see that. You may have a great intent, but don't let a predator go because you want to, and this is the problem, Chris, people don't use it for the right intentions. They want to get that sensational video to increase their following, and that's the wrong intention. To attract a predator that's coming for an alleged victim in order for you to build your network and then let them go or nothing can be done, what did we really win?
Well, the other thing that strikes me is that some of these vigilante groups out there, they can't work with law enforcement. So when they do get a case, they find somebody who comes in to meet a child for sex, they merely call 911 and they report this event. And so now you've got a potential collision of a police officer or sheriff's deputy responding to a call in a very volatile mix of emotions and people trying to get in and out of trouble. And it's a recipe for disaster, it would seem.
Absolutely, and on top of that, it's like going to a scene where you have maybe shots fired and a law-abiding concealed pistol license carrier pulls out a weapon, and law enforcement gets there and they don't have any ID on them, and they're looking at somebody who may have a gun. There's got to be some quick understanding as to who's the perpetrator and who's the protector. With the vigilante groups, I have to take this opportunity to ask that my brothers and sisters in blue, that if you have people in your community that are doing good work, maybe partner with them, maybe learn from their expertise. I mean, look at what you've never been to a police academy, but look at all the work you've done for law enforcement. There's some people that have good intent that you could probably work with. So just because, it comes from the outside doesn't mean it's not a good opportunity. I'd encourage law enforcement to maybe ask some of your proactive groups and see if you can't partner the right way.
Well, when we first started doing this, we didn't know what was going to happen. This is 19 years ago, and we had Perverted Justice, which was an online watchdog group, providing decoys. And they were very good at what they did. And cases ultimately were prosecuted, and they ended up teaching some law enforcement agencies how to chat and how to do this. Now, in the early days, ICAC, which is the federal group, International Crimes Against Children Task Force, was not keen on perverted justice. But over the years, we sort of morphed closer to law enforcement, and we just found it was more socially responsible. Because what good is it if you can't prosecute the case?
Right.
You can interrogate somebody, you can get into their minds, but if there's not a prosecution and the guy walks off into the sunset, it's unfulfilling from a television production standpoint as well.
May I touch on that?
Sure, I was going to go to you next.
And I think your viewers really need to understand the difference between To Catch a Predator or Chris Hansen or Takedown, the shows that you do when you're embedded with law enforcement, because there's probably a lot of armchair lawyers or truly lawyers out there that are pulling their hair out when you have somebody sit down and you start to question them. And that's all they see. And they laugh and say, well, that statement's not coming in. Well, in my opinion, you do it the right way. But in my opinion, and people may differ, I believe you are an agent of law enforcement at that point in time. You are working with law enforcement. when you sit down that suspect and you start asking them questions, they're not free to leave. And at that point in time, probably Miranda would need to be read before that statement would be admissible in the court of law, or they would have a right to counsel at that point in time. Never one time, any case that I've ever had with Sheriff Swanson or Chris Hansen has the other side been shown. And that's after you get done with your interview, the Sheriff's Department arrests them, takes them back to the jail, sits them down, reads them their Miranda rights, talks to them, asks them almost verbatim the same questions that you asked them, and you get that video along with an apology letter, for the most part, where the people are apologizing for their behaviors. When it's done the right way, that is a good case, because you can say, well, your viewers may say, well, that's never going to be admissible because he's working with the police. Well, when you turn over that video and they ask the same questions and get the same answers, or use your video to confront them and say, that's not what you said, you're a very integral part of that.
Well, and that's a bit controversial, and it has been from the very onset, and I face criticism, very honestly, within my industry for working too closely with law enforcement. And so my position has always been that if you're completely transparent about your methodology, then you're being honest and you tell people exactly what you're doing and how you do it. Speaking of which, I want you, Mike, to take us through if there is a typical interaction when a guy who's been arrested for this crime comes into your office after retaining you. Take me inside your office. Take me inside that conversation and the levels of denial, transference, shifting blame, if you will.
Shock and devastation first, and then entrapment. That's the biggest thing that most people believe, that they were entrapped, that the police lied to them. And nobody wants the police to lie. Everybody thinks that the police should always tell the truth. And that's not the case in undercover stings. They pose as drug dealers. They pose as children. They pose as people to investigate crimes. So there is denial, and it's you go through those same grief, denial, shame, all the things when a catastrophic event happens in your life. One of the things that we want to do is tell them that they can be truthful and that we believe in comeback stories. Okay, you've been knocked down, you got to get yourself up, you got to dust yourself off, and we got to get back into the game of being a good citizen and getting healthy. And a lot of times they're not healthy. Again, they're going through these addictions. So it's unhealthy behavior, an unhealthy state of mind. It's ruined their family. It's ruined their normal sexual functions. So many different things. And once you get them to where they're assessed by a professional and they understand that they're not a pedophile. It's just we blanketly call everybody that gets caught into this net a pedophile. And the sheriff goes back and he looks at every one of their downloads, and sometimes, if they're all child pornography,
That's
obviously,
a pedophile.
That could be a pedophile. But you see the slippery slope of a Playboy type of video to a penthouse, to a hustler, to gay, to, again, to the Sado type of thing. It's a slippery slope, and then you can see where it goes finally into the illegal child pornography or acting on these. And again, I just think they lose control. And we try to give them control of their life back, just like a heroin addict, just like an alcoholic. It's very, very similar. It goes on those same tracks.
What responsibility do you have as a lawyer, as an officer of the court, and both of you are really, in some sense, to not let somebody get away with a crime who has the potential of reoffending if the sentence is too light, if there's not some mandated therapy and treatment? I mean, that's a lot to put on
Sure.
a defense lawyer. I mean, the old defense lawyer joke is, the client get the money up front, the client does the time and get the money up front.
Right.
But there's a greater responsibility for somebody who handles these types of cases where the recidivism rate is potentially high and concerning.
Absolutely. That differentiates lawyers that just want to get their money up front, okay? When you come to our firm, it's very, very important. If you don't follow our direction, we fire you. And our firm is trying to get people healthy. And then I can go meet with the sheriff. I can go meet with our prosecutor, David Layton, who I think is one of the finest men I know. And I believe in these two gentlemen's judgment that they can differentiate between that vicious predator that you're talking about that should never get out versus somebody who's in an unhealthy state with addiction that maybe we can get better that will never reoffend.
Have you ever had someone who you wouldn't represent because of the severity of the crime or the fact that you, in your opinion, didn't think you could guarantee the safety of society by getting them off?
I think for the first time I turned down a very, very nationally high-profile case because for the first time in my career, my family members and had an issue with it. Other than that, no. I am an officer of the court. I do my best to try to help people. If not me, then who? And it's very important that the process, you can't put somebody in prison for life or 40 years without having counsel. And the worst thing that can happen, and the sheriff will tell you, if they have ineffective assistance of counsel and it goes to the appellate court and it comes back, then you have to do it all over again. So it's really important that they have top-notch counsel and that their rights are protected, and then if somebody deserves life in prison or 30 or 40 years, then everybody can sleep comfortably.
How do you balance between being an idealist who wants to put people away, go after justice, and being a humanist who says maybe this guy deserves a break?
I think it's important for your audience to realize that the justice system includes more than the police and the judges and the prosecutors and even the defense attorneys. There's a whole algorithm of people involved for justice. And justice is still subjective. I think it's probably shocking for most people to realize that 9 out of 10 cases never see their jury trial. They're all plea dealed. The system in America, it's impossible for every case to go to trial, to get the maximum sentence. We're trying to do justice reform and prison reform and jail reform, so there's always this balance. And when you, as a sheriff or a police chief or anybody in positions of influence, defense attorneys, prosecutors, judges, there's so many things that you have to take consideration that your personal feelings have to be put in check.
But I guarantee you, I would think that there have been cases where a guy was let out on bail,
Yeah.
or somebody got probation or parole,
Right.
that really rankled you.
Yeah, I mean,
that you had a gut feeling this guy's going to go back out.
It goes back before that. When we have a case before a judge and the judge gives a weak bond and they're literally walking out the door. You hear that cliche? By the time your ink's dry, they're walking out the door. That really does happen. They're getting PR bonds and we put in days of labor. Listen, I can't get caught in the weeds on that because I know that my justice influence is about the enforcement of the law. And I will tell you, when Mike brings a case or any attorney brings a case and we want to talk about some type of a resolution, one of the questions that I ask is, did the individual accept responsibility? And that plays a big role to me, and that I can go to the victims. And the victim advocates from the courts can go to the victims. When you have offenders that refuse to accept responsibility, those are the ones I think are the most dangerous.
Let's go back to Sean for a minute. We've got some more questions from the folks watching tonight. Sean?
Yeah, that's a perfect segue, Sheriff. This question is for both of you. Remember, we work with multiple agencies, and a lot of people dox these cases. A lot of people follow up and with the sentences and things like that. And we've heard this a few times. It seems like those caught in Genesee County are often sentenced to probation. Do the prosecutors have a second chance philosophy? Do they feel many of them will be scared straight?
Start with you, Sheriff.
Well, again, it goes back to that. There's a lot of hands to make that decision. Ultimately, we have 20 circuit court judges. We have a dozen district court judges, and you have all those judges that make a different judgment on the individual cases. It's all dependent on facts. When you look at big cities, there's always going to be a higher percentage of people getting on probation, tethers, because there's just so much demand on the system. When we, in our communities and other communities around the country, when you do a crime in a very rural area, there's a greater chance you're going to get a way bigger whack than you would in an area like we are here in your studio in Cleveland, because there's just so much demand on the system. So you have to do it to keep the logjam from happening. And so I can see, especially for victims' families, that when they are traumatized and the individual should get 20 years and they get 10 years, and then they get time served and they get paroled out in earlier years. I can't control that. But I will tell you that the system has to have a release valve for everything to push through, because if it doesn't, then nothing will be pushed through.
I think that question needs to be clarified, because it's a great question. The sexual offenders where there's an actual victim, most of those people go to prison. And the sheriff does a great job with victims. Our prosecutor does a great job with victims. I don't think our prosecutor or our sheriff are progressive when it comes to fighting crime or lenient sentencing. I think they get information, but you have to differentiate between actual criminal sexual conduct versus showing up and having you at the other end or ghost at the other end where there was not an actual victim, and then that information goes to the judge. Where did they fit in? What happened? And even though it says probation, they may have gotten a year in the county jail, where the judges feel I can give them 5 years probation and have more control over that individual than if they go to the state prison, get released on parole, and nobody's monitoring them afterwards.
But my question is always this in these sting operations to the men who get caught. What if I wasn't here? What if the sheriff's ghost team wasn't here, or one of the other teams with other law enforcement agencies we work with, and there was a teenage kid? There would have very likely have been, in my opinion, the rape of a child.
Well, I think that your opinion is justified. I don't know.
I mean, these guys aren't going to come over there and talk them out of doing it
Right.
like they try to convince me.
Yeah. I think your verbiage of rape of a child, of consensual sex with a 15-year-old, is a little bit different, because the sexualization of children now is much younger. It's scary. We don't have sex ed in schools anymore. We're banning books. We want the parents to teach everything about sex ed. We don't want the schools to be involved anymore. But most of our children now are learning sexual education off Pornhub, off the internet. And it's very scary. And they're having sex much younger, and it's consensual. I tell people I represent probably the largest group of child pornographers in the country, and their average age is 15. And it's all these teenagers taking selfies of themselves, of them nude, taking videos of themselves having sex with another 15-year-old, high school kids, and then they send it to their friends. And that's creating child pornography, possessing child pornography, delivering child pornography, and they're crimes. And so we go to schools and try to tell these kids, you can't do that. You are creating and manufacturing this. So it is a big problem, but you're right. My hope is they leave the Chipotle. My hope is they circle the parking lot. My hope is that they would have seen a real 15-year-old there and the brakes would have gone on.
But I'm thinking that in the process of deciding to go over there, that they've already thought out the possibility that this is the ghost team, or that Chris Hansen's there with his crew. And they've already come up with their excuse. It's sort of like when you guys were driving to the studio here, and you know the speed limit's 70, but you can push it to 78, and you get pulled over at 82. What's the story you're going to tell the state trooper? you know, not you guys necessarily, but
Right.
the colloquial we.
Right.
These guys already have their excuse down. And I don't think I'm being too harsh here. I think they've thought this through. Well, I'm going to do this because it's my fantasy. I know it's illegal. I know it's sexual assault because of the age of my target. And I know there's a possibility I'll get caught. It speaks to your point earlier about the addiction and how this travels down the road. But these guys know that there's a chance they're going to get caught. And if we're not there, there very likely will be sexual contact.
Right. What wins the game? Defense. And so, you know, a great offense is a great defense. And so I think they are built in to have a justification. I honestly believe that the majority of the people that we interact with, they know what they're doing is wrong. I mean, we'll chat 200 people on an operation and 3 will show. So what happened to the other 197 people? There's something that thought, okay, maybe I need to go and stop this. Maybe other things happen. But those 3 that show, even the 3 that show and those that didn't, everybody's looking around. We know our conscience. You don't have to have a big faith background. Human nature is, you know when you do wrong. And if you get caught, what's your out? And that's what people do. They do have it out. It's human instinct.
I don't disagree with you. I think your point is well taken, and it happens. And it's unfortunate, but I do think that Ghost and Takedown is a deterrent. Why would they say, is this Chris Hansen? Why would they say, is this Ghost? If those 197 people out of 200 are deterred because you could be on the other side, you're doing a great thing.
And I think that's the point of doing this. But I got to tell you, 19 years ago, when we did the first sting in Bethpage, Long Island, and I didn't know anybody was going to show up, but 17 guys did in 2.5 days.
Yeah.
I thought maybe we'd do it one more time, maybe we'd do it a third time, and no one would show up. I'd be taking a nap on the kitchen counter in the sting house, you know, with nothing to do like the Maytag repairman.
Right.
But 19 years later, we still see professionals, doctors, law enforcement officers, cases that lead to other criminal investigations. You know, I joke only, you know, with Sean about saying, you know, when crime stops being an issue, we can go do cooking shows in Italy, but that's not my reality, nor is it yours. I don't think this is going away, and that's sad to say.
Just like, you know, dope. You know, we have a huge hand in the interdiction of fentanyl coming into the state of Michigan and the communities. We have a network built in. Why do we still have these problems? Because we live in a broken world where there will always be those that do evil and those that do good. And as much as we're planning right here in the studio to do what we do best, there's an equal element of evil doing the same thing, but completely opposite of what our mission is. That's what's the reality of life. And we cannot be naive to it. There will always be jobs for law enforcement. There will always be jobs for defense attorneys. You haven't seen your client list go down. You haven't seen your cases stop. But I look at it as, how do we help that one? How do we protect that one? And that's what keeps us going. But I'm not optimistic to think that it will always stop. We've never had an operation where nobody chats us and nobody shows up.
Sean's got another question for us from our audience. Sean?
Thanks. First of all, I want to remind everybody who's watching on YouTube, I know that we have some full episodes on there, but you're only seeing about 1/5 of the episodes that actually exist. There's some great ones that are on the site. I know that a lot of you don't want to pay for a $4.99 subscription service, but that's the only way we can really support these operations. So please do your best to give it a shot and try watchtrueblue.com. James Stevens asks, and I'm sure he's asking this respectfully, Sheriff, please explain the formula or methodology of your statement, one arrest saves 25 children.
Thanks, James. You know, it's always difficult to justify when you do a stat, but that comes through like the Polaris Project, Operation Underground Railroad, those that do these operations globally. There is a standard among that industry that when you identify and hold accountable one predator, that it saves the lives of 25 future victims because there's now accountability. That's how I came up with that.
You know, it's interesting because we talk about these numbers, Sheriff, and I remember years ago there was an estimate that at any given time there are 50,000 predators online, and I think that's probably low, but quantifying that really doesn't matter because one is enough to cause harm to a child. And I guess, you know, the question is, you know, with all these different social media platforms appearing every day, it's a challenge just to keep up with it. I mean, I'm sure your detectives, your investigators go on these platforms, and every week there's something new. How do you keep up with it all?
Well, I mean, 15 years ago it was just Craigslist. Now nobody even uses Craigslist because Skip the Games came in and Kick and all these other app-based conversations, and majority of our interactions are just one touch and then go right into a texting conversation off anybody's app. But you can't keep up because it is a global market. And that's why when I talk about, you know, the 1 to 25, to James's point, there may not be 25 victims that have been sexually penetrated by this predator, but that one victim could be another child whose video or image was used to download, and that child is a victim. And when you look at the reach, there are industries that are building their base to feed the addiction of those addicted to pornography, and specifically child pornography. The crush videos of people literally standing on top of a glass table, a female, unclothed, or in some type of house coat with no underwear, as there's a camera underneath the table, and they crush the skull of a small domesticated animal. And that sexual gratification, somebody's actually downloading it. We just had a case, we're in the middle of it right now. They're monetizing these crush videos. How does it
Who's
get that?
watching this?
And when we hit the house, I will tell you, we had enough probable cause to get the search warrant. When we hit the house, I walked up to the stairs, and I knew what the video looked like. I knew how the room sat. And as soon as I turned the corner, I saw, there it is. That's the set. It was an upstairs bathroom right off of the main bedroom. And we ended up finding the glass table in the basement. It still had the blood spatter from these animals. They would get 20, 30 of these animals. They had a ring. I go back to your original question, and that is, the stats are probably way underestimated when we say it may be 1 in 250. But I will tell you this, they don't stop at 1, and they do not stop.
And it's not just these little-known social media platforms. You've had cases, and we've done the stories there, about people meeting children on Instagram. Mm-hmm. You know, basic, you know, everyday social media platforms.
And these are what parents and adults consider as safe. Instagram, Snapchat, you know, even people that are being sextorted that are in their 60s and 70s through Facebook, Instant Messenger. They build a relationship. They've already got your whole profile. Your wife or your husband's at work. They start building a friendship. This individual sends a graphic picture. It breaks down the barriers and oh my gosh, you're beautiful and how about this? How about you send me a picture of yourself? And okay, and they snap a picture, and this person's retired at 65, and it gets a little bit deeper, and then the person that started this conversation sends a video that's graphic and of the you know, maybe they're masturbating, and next thing you know, like, I sent you this video, send me your video. And this fish on the line sends in video, and bam! Next thing you know, I'm going to tell Angela, your wife, who works at the bank, if you don't send me a $15,000 transfer, and their whole world is crushed, and 15 goes to 30. I say that because they are experts at destroying people's lives. They do not care.
We have a whole documentary in the works that we're on the home stretch of about sextortion. And it's shocking to me, the prevalence of these cases. Yes. And oftentimes they're crime syndicates in West Africa or Eastern Europe, and they use a video of a adolescent girl, teenage girl, mm-hmm. to lure an adolescent boy into sending sexually suggestive pictures or video. And sometimes it's a matter of an hour or two between the transmission of this material, the extortion attempt, and the suicide. Yeah. I mean, I sat Monday of this week with a state representative in South Carolina whose son got trapped by this, and he passed him in the hallway, and a few minutes later heard a gunshot go off in the bathroom, and the boy had committed suicide.
It's more prevalent in the high schools. It's so sad. I mean, I know we have the national and international syndicates, but it's the junior that's doing it to the sophomore homecoming queen. And we just had a suicide in Michigan for something like that, where they were extorting the young man. And these kids and you parents really have to watch what they're doing and what they're watching on the internet.
And what strikes me about this is that the kids, at least in our experience, who are committing suicide, are not troubled kids.
No.
They're curious adolescents, good kids, good students, athletes who are so ashamed
That's it.
to have to go tell their parents.
Yeah.
And so they choose suicide as opposed to doing it. And at the end of the day, who's going to see the dirty pictures? Grandma's not going to see them. Other kids at school? So what? But they play upon this not yet developed mind of these kids, and we get these suicides.
There's a reason why they say survive till you're 25, because that's how long it takes the brain to develop into a mature brain. And when you look at all the decisions we've all made prior to 25, I am so glad I'm not the same dude I was when I was 18, 16. But the enemy preys on that, like you said. They look at your profile and they'll see when you put a sad face emoji on Snapchat, and that's when they strike. They have algorithms where when these emojis pop up, that they are alerts to them, and they will send out a DM. And you don't even have a clue that your 13-year-old just got a Snap message that responded to their "I'm having a horrible day" message. People yell at me, school sucked. Hey, what's wrong? You're beautiful. Knowing that they thrive for attention, love, that's what grooming is. And a lot of these people, that grooming technique is different for everybody. It's like we do in our business when we take confessions. As a law enforcement investigator, I want to get somebody to tell me why they did what they did, and I literally sell them prison. So who would do that? It's the job to psychologically get into their head and put on a comfortable coat and tell me why you did this. I don't need to know what you did. I already know that. Tell me why. And you keep doing that, and that's why we have a near 100% confession rate, because we create an environment for people who are desperate to tell why. That's the problem is you have the people that they don't know why, and they get caught up, and then reality hits and they see themselves from afar, and that's where suicide comes in, and that's where the immature brain comes in to make bad decisions like pulling out a handgun, walking past your dad, and taking your life.
When you get a case where there's been a confession to the police, what can you do for that defendant?
Again, I'm not Houdini. So when they come into my office, the facts are the facts. And a lot of times they think, hey, I paid you money, you better get me out of this. That's not the case. The case is giving them a soft landing, getting them healthy. And I feel good every day that I can go to my office and help somebody. Chris, I can't tell you how many times, I've been doing it 33 years, somebody comes up to me that I did a case from 20 years ago and said, you saved our family.
Absolutely.
And they give me a hug. I have no idea who they are. I don't remember the case. You got my husband off alcohol. He was beating me. He wasn't going to work. The kids were affected by this. And I want to show you my 2 children have graduated from college. Here are my grandchildren. And I want to thank you for believing in my husband. That's the only way that you can actually do my job. It is attorney and counselor. It's not about getting people off all the time. It's getting people off drugs. It's getting people off alcohol, getting people off pornography addictions. And that is what we can do to try to go to a Sheriff Chris Swanson or a prosecutor David Layton and say, there's mitigating factors here. We've got them in therapy. They may twist an ankle, but at least I'm a parachute. They're not gonna fall flat.
Do you ever go home and say to your wife, I don't know about this case, man. I just don't feel good about doing it.
Yeah, I compartmentalize. I don't say anything when I go home. I have about a 25-minute drive from my home to my office and from my office to my home, and that 25 minutes is a decompression time for me. And literally, I have to tell people, if you ever saw one of those huge storage units, which each one of them have a garage door to them, I have to every day put those cases inside there, because the horror that we see, that you see, is can really take an effect on you.
When I do the podcast, Predators I've Caught, we go back through all of the cases that I've done, and there are hundreds, obviously, so there's no shortage of material. But one of the questions I'm asked most is, because I take questions at the end, have you ever gone to therapy? You know, how do you deal with this dark material? And I have never gone to therapy. I suppose it would be constructive to do so. I just haven't done it. And I compartmentalize like you do, and I'm sure you do. But what do you do for therapy after, I mean, obviously, you, like many chief law enforcement officers, you see the big picture. You think about solving societal issues, not just, okay, we caught 10 predators in the last sting. Well, how do you get away from it? How do you stay fresh and energized?
I think people that are in the public service industry, police, fire, EMS, that see so much death. I mean, I've, you know, not to count sabers, but 31 years, June 2nd this year. I became a licensed paramedic when I was 20 years old. I saw my first violent shooting at 18. Guy shot himself in the head in front of his wife, brains on the wall, gunpowder, the smell of burnt blood, because it smells. I ask myself many times, because people, the farther you go, ask that, and I think we just have a rhino skin that's built up over time. I think there's people that are separated to allow them to take on what others could not. That's why people are medical examiners that do autopsies 10 a day on babies and elderly. How do they do it? I think God creates us with the ability to just do what we're called to do, and some of it is to take out the trash, and some of it is to see the ugly of ugly. On the way to the studio, I'm talking to a 10-year veteran who watched a guy just a couple hours before the show sitting on the back of a pickup truck at Hurley Hospital, and when he was confronted, jumped over the 5th story to his death and exploded. Like, how do you do that and then go home to your wife and say, hey, you know,
what's for dinner?
Yeah, exactly. Because they don't deserve to hear this.
No.
You know, part of our live studio audience today is my wife, who I've been with for 29 years. She heard things in this show that she's never heard, and she's a brilliant, educated social worker. We have to do that. That's the way I deal with it. Is there's two Chris's, business Chris and the other one.
I guess we all have to do it. Sean Reck has a couple more questions from our audience tonight. Sean?
Thanks, Chris. First of all, pedophiler, yes, that's his screen name. We are live. I swear to God, we're live. We're not going to ask your question, I'm sorry. Also, Accountant234, our channel is not geo-blocked. Our streaming service is not geo-blocked anywhere in the world except for China and North Korea. And that's because they blocked everything that comes to the United States. So anybody in any country can watch all of the stings on watchtrueblue.com. They just can't see some of our movies that are only licensed for the United States. But most of you tune in to watch the Predator stings. I want to remind everybody that you can buy shirts and get free stickers at trueblueswag.com. I know swag is free and we charge for our shirts, but these stickers are actually free, and you just have to pay shipping, and we'll give you a whole stack of them if you'd like. So just wanted to remind you of that before we finish up here, and remind everybody that you can subscribe to the actual service at watchtrueblue.com, watchtrueblu.com. And a lot of people asked about new stings, even though I mentioned it earlier, some joined us late. The stings start again next Thursday, and we won't have another one of these live shows for a month. So thank you for tuning in, and let's get back to Chris and our guests to bring it home.
You mentioned a case earlier, a very prominent guy who was arrested once in a prostitution case. You dealt with it. And then he got caught again in a ghost operation.
Very disappointing case, I think, for a lot of members of our community. He was a high-profile stockbroker, money manager, and drove a Corvette. And the sheriff's department caught him in a prostitution sting maybe a year or two earlier, that we were able to say this was an aberration, things to that effect, and then to find out that he was caught up in a ghost operation.
After he was caught in a prostitution sting.
Right. And I think the biggest thing that disappointed, I did not handle the second case. I think that the biggest disappointment was the lack of acceptance of responsibility, the lack of accountability. Because when you don't accept accountability or accept responsibility or try to change your behaviors, you are going to reoffend. And that's where the difference becomes, is when you can have somebody assessed and they find better alternatives to the stress or the coping mechanisms that they're going through. Again, we all have those issues. Sheriff Swanson was humble. He's run and participated and completed, I believe, 3 or 4 Ironmans. He works out all the time. This is a true story. Both of us were probably going through a lot of stress, and about 10 o'clock at night in a local workout facility that's open, I opened up the door to go into the sauna to ride a bike, and there was a gentleman in there by himself,
Fitness pays.
riding away. And I asked if I could join him. We had no idea we were going to be there together, and that's, that coping mechanism.
Well, I'm an advocate of that. I think it's saved me in a lot of ways. As we wrap up here tonight, I want to get some final thoughts from both of you as to where we go from here. There's not going to be a change in the explosion of social media platforms. Human behavior is not going to change overnight. If anything, there are calls to have more creative solutions for people who commit crimes as opposed to incarceration. If you could pick 2 or 3 things that you could implement across the country, not just in Genesee County, what would they be?
Well, I'm not going anywhere. As a lawman, I've said it before, there's not a safe corner in Genesee County that you could come and try to perpetrate the human trafficking crime. Don't try to, target our kids. Don't try to take advantage of vulnerable people. We're coming after you. And that's why we work with other counties. There should be a safe place in the state of Michigan or in the country. We want you to know that there's always a sheepdog watching. We're not going anywhere. Chris Hansen could be behind any door. That's the first thing, is we'll continue to protect. That's not going away. But my message is actually to the offender, is that we wouldn't have a crime if we didn't have people that were going to offend. If we didn't have people that consume child pornography, we wouldn't have child porn. That economic benefit of, supply and demand, let's shut down the demand. If you're out there right now, message number 1, and you struggle with this, get help before it's a human. And there are people out there that will help you right now. You could just say, I'm addicted to pornography. It doesn't have to be child porn. You could be I'm struggling. There are people, I would much rather you call 911 saying, please come help me before I take this out on a human. And number 2, for the victims out there. I know there's people out there that have been victimized that have never told their story. And I've said that at every briefing, that we want you to come forward. You'll be protected. We've seen that in major cases throughout the sports industry, whether it's a Larry Nassar case or the Catholic Church or the Boy Scouts of America or the Sandusky case. There are people that have been victimized that they don't want to face the shame of reliving it. And if I can do anything and convince you that will set you free and you want it, I'm your biggest advocate, at the same time bearing a mighty sword.
Do you find it mentally draining, and do your people on the Ghost team find it mentally draining to deal with predators?
Yeah, you have to. I mean, our chatters, if you saw what they look like, they are not the same as the decoys. These are moms and dads that have great families. You would never suspect it. They have to go to the darkest underbelly of society to speak their language. Otherwise, we get called out. There's a reason why we've done, 180 arrests, 186 arrests, and we do get called out, but not because we don't know what we're talking about. They are really good at being horribly vulgar. And it's tough. And so I give them mental breaks. We transition our chatters in. We have our decoys sign an agreement. They're not forced to be decoys. They're all my officers. But they want to be part of the solution. They want to be part of the protecting. And I have to be very conscious of that, especially one last thing about people that are reviewing child pornography cases, the digital downloads, because we take everybody's phones. And like Mike said, once you're addicted, you download that. You want your cache of pictures and videos to be at your ready. And when you have somebody that downloads those using our software that's the best in the country, you're talking about thousands of images that they see in a month's time, and then they have to go home and cook spaghetti.
That question, by the way, came from Jonathan, who's the father of a 23-month-old, and via my wife, Gabrielle. You talked about your wife earlier.
Yeah.
She's watching and monitoring some of the questions as well. So,
thank you.
Mike, from a defense counsel's standpoint, a defense lawyer's standpoint, what should we be doing as a society? I mean, is there enough help out there for people? It seems to me no. And I speak at conferences all the time where there are therapists there who do great work, right, who intercede in cases where somebody who's troubled is 15, 16, 17 years old, and you see this young man go into a great college education as opposed to be the abusive football player who is mean to women. You know, if you get these people at the right stage in life, you can help them.
Absolutely. And I liken it to drug addiction, alcohol addiction. You can take a drug and it may not take over your life. You can drink alcohol and it may not take over your life. You can watch pornography with your wife and make that part of a healthy sexual relationship. Some people may agree, some people may not. But when it takes control of your life and that slippery slope, and then you start fantasizing or you start watching, it's not child porn, it's having sex with my stepdaughter, having sex with my stepfather. There's really some terrible things out there that people can get caught up in, but there's not enough therapists that are going into this pornography addiction. So my word of advice would be, don't let pornography overtake you, similar to an alcohol addiction where alcohol overtakes the life.
And this is
drug.
a common thread, there's no question, from a defense lawyer standpoint, from a law enforcement chief standpoint, from a media standpoint. I mean, I think we can all agree on this.
Absolutely. I think if you start questioning people how they got to sitting in that chair before you and on Takedown, I think you're going to see that they have normal lives. People may not have even known that they're secretly watching pornography. They're having relationship issues.
Well, the collateral damage.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a big deal here.
Yeah.
In that, you know, I hear all the time, especially in the podcast, you know, we had no idea that our father was
Right.
doing this. We had no idea my husband was doing this. And we see that in the current predator investigations too. These families are shocked.
Yeah, and it's a circle of shame. They know when they're looking at this and they're doing bad things, and they're ashamed of it. And then they stop. You'll see the cycle. And then they're depressed and they're not getting help. And the only thing that makes them feel better is to get back to whatever that addiction is, whether it's drugs, alcohol, or pornography. And this circle of shame, I see it all the time. They're ashamed of doing this. And then
How do you break the chain?
how do we break the chain? And I think we have to acknowledge it like you are, that it's real, like the sheriff is. The sheriff goes out and he holds up a picture. And he holds up that picture and says, if anybody else has ever run into this person, and my clients are so upset about that, and I say that might have been the best thing that ever happened to you because nobody came forward. And that allowed me to give you the soft landing. So I know it hurt that day, but nobody came forward after you were on Takedown. Nobody else came forward. So maybe that is the one that I have a chance to give that soft landing to get that person into therapy. They're always mad at the sheriff. And it's hard to look in the mirror. They blame the sheriff. They blame Chris Hansen. I get it, because it's hard to admit that you showed up and knocked on the door for a purported 15-year-old on the other side.
Mike Manley, thank you very much. Sheriff Chris Swanson, Genesee County, Michigan, I appreciate it very much. Let's make sure we get together and do this again. I think our audience appreciates it. I think it's important to continue this dialogue and to create awareness, which is what happens from these stings, and having both sides of this issue here. So thank you very much. Have a good night.
My honor, Chris. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. We will be back next week on Takedown with a new sting. We have ready for you, and several others to follow that. So thank you for joining us. Thanks for keeping an open mind to all of this. We'll see you soon. Well, that was great.